Good morning. Happy Memorial Day. Good morning. Please join me as I ring the Tibetan bowl as a call to service. Listening as the sound fills the sanctuary and then recedes back into the silence. This is the time to open our hearts to what the service can bring. You know, I'm going to do that again because this is our last service of the year and I wanted to sound. Thank you, Michael. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarcely heard amid the guns below. Words of John McCrae from the First World War, the war that was to end all wars. On this Memorial Day, 2024, we welcome you. Good morning to you, our members and friends and visitors, both on Zoom and in the sanctuary. To the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. Love is the power that holds us together as a community. As we enter into worship, let us open our hearts to the healing power of liberating love, to the young and the old, the innocent and the jaded, the fresh of mind and the deeply steeped. There is room here for each and every one. Come be among us. You are welcome. My name is Annie Lavin, and I am your service leader this morning. Our guest speaker is Rachel Evans. Rachel lives in DC and is part of the Duke Divinity Hybrid Program and is serving as a chaplain candidate and second lieutenant in the Army Reserve. We are pleased she is with us on this Memorial Day. The title of her sermon is Why We Build Memorials. She writes, our country has been grappling with memorials. Who should remain high on the pillars and who should be brought down? But what within us longs for memorials? Why do we want to valorize admired figures and build them into statues? Together, we'll explore why we need to memorialize our heroes, as well as why we need to grapple with our own lesson that heroic tendencies, if we are going to be whole, less than heroic tendencies, if we are going to be whole. And we look forward to her talk. And a reminder that today is the final traditional Sunday service at UUCR until next December 8th, with one exception. September 8th, but there's an exception here. Reverend Sue is going to be with us on June 16th as a final service with us in the sanctuary. So you want to mark that on your calendars. There's another date coming up about that, but I'll do that in its rightful order. After this Sunday, we are going to have our ever famous Sunday discussion services at UUCR, mainly led by people like yourselves, people from the congregation who will lead the round circle discussion, and MQ is up first. So check your order of service. It's going to be a good Sunday. They all will be. So plan to be with us. Gratitude to our musician and accompanist, Michael Casey, and the greeters and the coffee hosts and the tech team. We love you all, and we're grateful for what you bring to the service. And we have a couple announcements. Reverend Sue's gratitude celebration, that's not when she's here, this is our celebration at the Country Club, is June the 4th. 11th, well, thank you for that correction. Wherever I got it from, I got it wrong. But they want you to RSVP by the 27th, which is tomorrow. So if you're planning on coming, give the office a call. Stop in and see Darlene on your way out. UUCR summer office hours begin on June the 1st. Darlene will be in the office on Saturday and Sunday from 8:30 until 12:30. Please have all pledge and auction payments and reimbursements and payments requests into the office by June 19th and allow time for processing before the end of the fiscal year. I think that's all we have here. Okay, and now let us begin. Do you want to do the chalice lady?
Please join me as we light our chalice. Spirit of life, be with us as we light this flame to honor our veterans of wartime. Teach us how to care for those who have borne arms in our names. Be with us as we honor our veterans of peacetime. Help us to remember that each of those who are called to serve is a beloved soul. Be with us as we strive to create a community that is good and safe enough to welcome them home. Help their souls to heal, that they may know themselves to be both holy and whole. May this burning chalice keep these words alive in our hearts.
Thank you, Rachel. And now we have our first hymn. It's number 318, We Would Be One. Please stand as you are able. For opening words this morning, I would like to share some thoughts from UU minister Paul Sawyer. He tells us how, as a kid, he learned to play the bugle, and now looking back with appreciation for the patience of his family as he practiced daily and loudly in their small home. Imagine that. He would practice playing taps, and when he got good at it, he would play for pocket money at the local cemetery for military funerals. He says, I didn't know the story behind taps at the time, but still, something always spoke to me in my heart that told about dying and those who remain, about remembering well. And he writes, think of when you feel safe and at peace. What's the signal that tells you it's okay to be at peace? For people in the US military, the signal that says you're okay, it's safe for this minute, is the melody called taps, and it's only 24 notes long. It's composed by a general in the Civil War and his bugler. It's hard to think back now how important bugle calls were in the military. Once upon a time, in the days before radio, bugle calls were the only way military units could communicate to groups over a large area. In the 1860s, at the end of the day, if it was time and there was peace enough to play taps, that was the signal the camp was safe. To a camp of soldiers, the notes of taps mean that you might be on duty, but if not, you now could close your eyes and sleep. The melody touches each of us when we hear it played, whether at a memorial service or in the distance across the hills of white crosses at Arlington or maybe closer to home. It's powerful and haunting and lingering, like a powerful prayer. This Memorial Day weekend lets us think of every soldier, those who died and those who came home, all who signed up to defend this country we share. They left their life behind, they left those who they loved behind. They set out perhaps with fear in their hearts, because soldiers are human too. And they answered the call so that we could remain safely in our home, so that we could gather safely without fear as we do this morning. We are grateful. And now Michael is going to play taps for us. Let us pause a moment to remember. Amen. And now we have acknowledgements of the heart, that time in the service when we share with each other the hard parts of our lives, the shadows as well as the bright parts, and we celebrate and support each other. I will light the candle if you come up and use the mic.
Well, I have a joy. My daughter, who lives in Florida, came up to visit me for 4 days. We had a great time. We got our nails done. We went to tea party. We had pizza movie night at home. And it was just a very, very special time.
Well, I have a couple joys. First of all, my sister Alicia visiting from California. She's been lately, since she retired, probably visiting us every 3 months. But it's wonderful. We really like having her around. And yesterday I had a lot of fun at the tea party, but I wasn't actually there very long. I was there for the parade. But I went down and dropped off 4 people. Was it 4? Yeah. No, 3 people. And dropped them off at the post office, and then I came home. And last December I bought an electric bike, but I hadn't ridden it much because it was cold out. But I got the electric bike out again, and I ran down there on the bike, and because of all the traffic on 213, I took the back roads and went down Lawyers Row and ended up right behind the stage. I thought, that's pretty clever. And then my sister needed a ride, and then some friends needed a ride, and she had friends from, used to be neighbors in California who were in Southern Maryland, and they came over, and I ended up shuffling people back and forth to the tea party quite a bit, as well as going back and forth a few times on the bike, and really had a blast.
He's not mentioning that I happen to be standing on Lawyers Row, and a blur goes by me, and it's Dave on his, and the smile. He looked like a kid 10 years old having a ball. So it was fun to watch that.
I'm here with some joy. Been thinking about my grandkids a lot. My youngest grandson is graduating from Gonzaga High School next Sunday. And in the fall, he's going to be starting at Creighton University in Omaha. His older brother is a junior at Holy Cross. Our other granddaughter is a senior at Coastal Carolina. And I just see their, the goodness that's going to happen, that they're starting their life. And then I think about myself.
Hi, my name is Deb Morris, and I'm a member of the UU Fellowship in Newark, Delaware. Thank you. But because I split my time between Chestertown and Elkton, since my daughter and son-in-law live here, I come to this church when I'm down in Chestertown. And anyway, I have a brand new baby granddaughter to join the 2.5-year-old granddaughter. So I'm pretty thrilled about that.
Annie, thank you for that rendition, and Michael, about TAPS. That really caused me to reflect on how small a relationship I have with people who have been in the military. And the important one for me is my brother, who right after he finished medical school was drafted and went to Vietnam, and it was a horrible experience for him. And I thought dearly of that. He came back and he's fine, but different. And I feel strongly the need to write to him and tell him how much I love him, and thank you for serving.
Nancy?
Yes, hi. Sorry I'm not there this morning. I have a couple of joys. Like Bob Bjork, I've got 2 granddaughters graduating from high school, one on June 1st and one on June 4th. And I plan to make them both in 2 different states. And I also had a lovely chat with Diane Turpin. As many of you will remember Diane when she was attending here. She's doing well up in Maine, but still misses UUCR and all of us here. And she sends her good wishes and hellos to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Well, tomorrow I'm observing my 87th birthday. I'm not celebrating it necessarily, but I'm observing it. And it gave me an occasion. There's a poem I really enjoy about old age, which certainly is me. So I'll read it to you if I get it unfolded here. It's called Jenny Kiss Me. And in this Trumpian era of hatred, it's nice to think we can have pure relationships. It goes like this. Jenny kissed me when we met, jumping from the chair she sat in. Time, you thief, who love to get sweets in your list, put that in. Say I'm weary, say I'm sad, Say I'm health and wealth and Missy. Say I'm growing old but Ed. Jenny, kiss me. I love it.
I'm going to light a candle. With all the joys we've been sharing, we are mindful, as we always include those parts of our world that are at war, sorrow and destruction. So we are mindful of that, and we bring hope and faith for goodness in the future. And also a candle will be lit for those joys and concerns that stay unspoken in your heart. We'll have a moment of silence. Blessed be. This is the time of the offertory when we pass the basket for funds to support the mission of this church. Thank you. Once again, Michael nailed it for the song for the offertory. I know you're paying attention to all of his music. It really supports whatever the theme of the topic of the day is. So thank you for that. And now we're doing a joint reading. It's number 512 in your gray hymnal. I think I'm going to go with the 512. My secretary has been off this week in so many ways, we won't get into it. It's a responsive reading, so I thought I would do the italicized print if you will read the stanza. It's "We give thanks this day." We give thanks this day. 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 We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. And now we invite Rachel Evans to come to the podium for our sermon this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I will say I'm a career changer. I am in my first year at Duke Divinity School. I'm also in my first year in the Army. So all that is to say, if you're a guest and you don't enjoy the speaker today, please come back another time. Don't let me be the representative here. Oh, sure. Is that better? Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. I would also just like to say my wife is here with me today, Steph. We have a baby boy coming in July, and I say that because she's at that stage where she is very obviously pregnant, but I feel like there's a lot of people that don't want to acknowledge it until it is officially safe, and I can say she is officially very pregnant right now, so we're excited about that. As you all know, tomorrow is Memorial Day. It's come up already, and if we're being honest, I have very complicated feelings about this particular holiday. On the one hand, I am a soldier. I come from a military family. I know many brave men and women who have sacrificed months and years away from their families, sustained injuries to their bodies and their minds and their spirits, and even paid the ultimate sacrifice in service of higher ideals. It's this final group that we honor today. I'd ask that each of you consider, if you're open to it, spending just a few minutes today on a site that I appreciate. It's called mymemorialday.org. And it's a website that just has a lot of profiles of individuals who have died in many different wars in America. It shares letters they shared with members of their family, pieces of their lives. It's a way to sort of humanize these losses that I think at times we can really generalize in a way that we lose sight of some of the particular. Each of them was a unique entity made in the beauty and image of the divine. But Memorial Day is also a holiday that stirs my own discomfort with our American glorification of war, and are at times less than noble reasons for engaging in it. I think of the service members who join our ranks not necessarily out of a sense of patriotism or service, but a lack of economic opportunity. When I was a high school teacher in Baltimore City public schools, university and college recruiters very rarely came, but Army, Navy, Air Force recruiters were ever present. This was not the case in wealthier or whiter school districts that were nearby. And I hated that dynamic. I hated that for so many in our country, the choice to serve is in fact a choice. And for others, we say, this is actually going to be your primary path if you choose to pursue it to economic stability. And I think we need to acknowledge that that is a complexity when we look at our armed forces. But more broadly, the question I would posit for us this weekend is, why do we memorialize as a society? Why do we build monuments? What purpose does this ritual serve for us? Monuments embody our ideals. They unite us. They are a way of signaling both who we are, but more importantly, who we aspire to be. What we value, what we elevate by a person or people who exemplify those ideals. In this moment in our country, when we're struggling to define who we are, it should come as no surprise that we are struggling to decide monuments and namesakes and the stories behind them. Some of those battles feel more simplistic than others to me. We should remove statues to the Confederacy. We should remove Confederate leaders. This is long overdue, and it is healing and it is cathartic for our country that we are beginning to have these conversations. But some of these conversations are far more nuanced, They reveal a lot of what is under the surface as we are wrestling through what it means to be citizens of this country together. For example, the San Francisco School Board voted and then later reversed a decision to rename elementary schools that were named after Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Dianne Feinstein, for their direct or indirect ties to oppression or racism. The writings of Sierra Club founder John Muir reflected a history of complicated statements around Native Americans. Many of those statements were derogatory and dehumanizing, but we also see in his writing that he opposed slavery. He affirmed the inherent dignity and value of every person. What qualifies as being monument worthy? These are the questions that we're wrestling for, because what we put on a pillar represents what we stand for. Some groups have even protested against assorted Martin Luther King Jr. monuments, not necessarily because of anything that has to do with his civil rights activism, but because of a history of infidelity and adultery. Even our most valorized figures are complicated when you look underneath the surface. But memorials aren't good at holding that complexity. Statues and what we put in our public square very much trains our minds to think in binary thinking: good, evil, hero, or villain. We like doing that because it simplifies the world for us and it simplifies what we have mirrored back. As we're realizing, though, human beings are more complicated than that. So why do we seek these idealized narratives? Why do we long to take an imperfect person, an imperfect story, mount them, and turn them into a caricature of what it is that we value? I would suggest that we do this in part because we want to simplify our own narratives. It makes us feel safer. We as a species are prone to seek redemption via affiliation. We may not erect marble statues in our own front lawn, but we are always wrapping ourselves in signs that project our aspirational values. We hang a rainbow flag that means I am an inclusive person. We put up a lawn sign that says hate has no home here. That means I am a kind person. We advertise our affiliation with a particular candidate or a particular party to say, I am smart, I am a just person, I am on the right side. We want these correct role models and tribal affiliations so that all of our own goodness and rightness is affirmed. We want to tell the world that we are on the right team. We do not want to tell the world that we yell at our spouse. We do not want to tell the world about areas where we have found ourselves not being in step with history and realizing a few years or decades after the fact that we were in fact on the wrong team for something. But doing so forces us to uncomplicate our own stories, and so we don't want to do that for the sake of our own mental comfort. Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie discusses what she calls the danger of a single story. In her context, she was specifically talking about her experience coming to America as a Nigerian woman and realizing how limited the portrayals of Nigerian culture had been in American culture. But I think the lesson applies more broadly. She says the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. The consequence of a single story is this: it robs a person of their dignity. It makes our recognition of our humanity, or our common humanity, difficult. I am a soldier. I am a seminarian. I am a wife. I am a native Texan. All of these are true, and yet on their own, they are all limiting. They all diminish even the positive labels, the fullness of who I am. And I know the same is true for each of you. I'd like to tell you a story about my grandmother. So as I mentioned, I'm a native Texan. I grew up in a really, really small town. And there's a lot of different stories I can tell you about my grandmother, but I will tell you two. The first story is what has happened as I have observed her over the last several years politically. I have seen her fall into a media loop of reinforcement of fear and distrust of the other. She is very concerned about the border. She is very concerned about immigration. She has this fear that people are coming to the country that will rob her of her culture, that will make our state of Texas unsafe. She spews names of groups of people that I do not recognize, that make me uncomfortable. This is a story of who she is. This is a story of how she engages politically and what I hear from her. There is another story I could tell about my grandmother. The neighborhood that she lived in was predominantly white for a very, very long time. And over the last few decades, the demographics have shifted, and her neighborhood that was now almost completely white is now predominantly Guatemalan immigrants and refugees, many of whom are undocumented. My grandmother is beloved in this neighborhood, and it's because she has always had a value of loving her neighbor, loving the people that are close to her. And so despite what she watches on television, her day-to-day life, she basically spends taking care of everybody around her. She bakes cakes, she makes people soup when they are sick. She works with the younger children in the neighborhood to translate among the adults, the majority of whom do not speak English. I have walked around the neighborhood with my grandmother, and I have seen the warmth and the love that she is greeted by people, and the warmth and love that she feels back. And it is so confusing to me to then be in a different room for her and hear her talk about these same groups of people in such a dehumanizing way. So what's the single story I tell about my grandmother? Is she a racist bigot who votes the wrong way every 4 years? Is she a humanitarian who takes care of her neighbors as a model for faith and practice? Neither of those stories are true. And both of those stories are true. I would suggest, if we are brutally honest, the same is true for each of us. If I talked to my grandmother, she would not see a contradiction in her story. She has a narrative where it all makes sense, where it all comes together. But as an outsider, I can see the inconsistencies. I can see the hypocrisies. I like to think of myself as being self-aware, but I'm sure that from an outsider's perspective, someone could tell a very similar story about me. There is a story of Rachel as hero, as idealist, as champion for justice. And there is a narrative of Rachel as small-minded and petty and self-absorbed, blind in all the ways that I am. I don't like to sit in that tension. I much prefer to think of myself as a hero, and I much prefer to think of the people on statues as heroes. I don't like a world where we have to hold those things to be true, and yet we must. We celebrate Memorial Day as a country because we like a simple story too. We like to celebrate warriors who were brave and selfless and good, and because we celebrate them, we are also brave and selfless and good, and that makes us important. And because we are important, we are worthy, and because we are worthy, we are going to be loved. But what if we allowed ourselves to make room for a more complicated story that made room for many stories as a society? What if we said we live in a country that is capable of great good and tremendous harm? We have used war to liberate the oppressed and exploited, and also to exploit and oppress. Men and women in uniform serve for a variety of reasons, some noble and some not. And some of them lose their lives in that process. And their lives matter not because of how they died, but because they lived. We are all someone's hero, and we are all also someone's villain. We are brave, and we are cowardly. We are generous, and we are selfish. And when we die, may we not need to be diminished to a single story in order to be loved by those who knew us best. Thank you.
And so I thought perhaps we would go right into our discussion now and then have our final hymn at the conclusion. So I'm sure this has stirred up a lot of thoughts and feelings and ideas, and I will pass the mic so you can share them, ask questions.
Rachel, I think we think about who do you make a monument to? If we only made it for perfect people, there'd be no monuments. But this thing about the Civil War monuments is a problem because to me, you don't celebrate because Robert E. Lee because he had a just cause, but because he's effective in doing it. But if you're black, it doesn't seem the same. It seems that you're supporting those people who would suppress you. So it's a real problem in society.
In academic circles, there's a discussion of whether human beings can hold the same contrary ideas in one mind. And you have pointed out, and I think we all experience, that it's very possible to have a person that has contrary ideas. And so your whole discussion and thesis refutes your desire to withdraw these Confederate monuments. And I agree with Harry in bringing that up.
That has occurred, that thought about that Harry and this other gentleman expressed has occurred to me too, and maybe we need reminders to also of the bad old times.
So mentioning academic circles is an interesting way to talk. On Tuesday of last week, a friend and I went over to the Western Shore, and there's a memorial in Lexington Park to the Black soldiers who participated in the Civil War. And here in Chestertown, there's also a memorial to the Black soldiers who participated in the Civil War. Those two memorials are two of only 27 in the entire country. It's remarkable that Chestertown has one. And what's interesting about the memorials in Memorial Park, the memorial to the white soldiers who served both on the Confederate and on the Union side are named, those who died. The memorial to the Black soldiers, their names are not there. It is kind of a collective memorial, if you will. I think it's important to make a distinction between how we say names. We actually name people. And that the fact that there are names lacking for the Black soldiers who gave their lives from Kent County in the Civil War, to me is troubling, you know. So it's just remarkable when I came here to find that memorial to Black soldiers in Chestertown was really heartening in some ways. So just wanted to remind people of that.
Did you have any comments on any of this? Just feel free to.
Oh, no, I was just gonna echo, and I would agree that I think I was trying to draw a little bit of a distinction between the things where we do need to hardline and where I think we have to grapple a little bit more with complexity. And so I do think the Confederate issue is a non-starter. I wish that we had actually, I think we can learn a lot from, our brothers and sisters in Germany who have been far more strict in actually naming what they will and will not tolerate in collective spaces. And so I would echo that we are, part of why this process is so painful for us is because we have been so overly tolerant of it for so long, as opposed to immediately reacting in the ways that so many other countries do when they realize that they are on the wrong side of history with something.
So I appreciate you drawing the line between like humans not wanting to accept, either they're heroes or villains. And I think that I never connected the dots to memorials and how that kind of plays out in daily life. Like we won't acknowledge that the father molested the children or that a soldier raped another soldier or the police could be good and bad. Like we have to have it one or the other. And I feel like if we could make memorials transparent, like when I learned that Martin Luther King was, cheating on his wife, that reflected on his character, even though he had amazing things to say, right? Why are we not putting those on memorials? Why are we not showing the whole story right there in the plaques? Why is that not a thing?
I just have another perspective on the Confederate memorial issue. I agree that we don't want to try to obliterate our history, but I think it's important when we talk about Confederate memorials to keep in mind that they weren't put up after the Civil War. They were put up in Jim Crow.
Here in Chestertown, there's a group called James Taylor Group, and they're honoring a lynching that occurred in 1892 in Chestertown. And they are currently going through a process of, with EJI, of creating a placard that we're going to put on Cross Street. And obviously, this is basically it's a memorial to this individual. We don't really know very much about him. We just know what he was accused of. But it's a memorial, but it's more than that. I mean, it's trying to make us here in Kent County acknowledge what has happened. And so, but I mean, it's a very important memorial. So I'm glad we're doing it.
Anyone else?
I think that forgiveness is a big part of my faith as a Unitarian Universalist. And I recently read about the funeral of Ulysses S. Grant, who was a general in the Civil War and on the Union side and a president. And at his funeral, both Confederate generals and Union generals came together to honor this man. And I thought that was a great example of forgiveness and healing.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? I'm not putting you in the spot.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
One thing that's just coming to mind, hearing some of what you're sharing, is I had a manager many years ago who used to always say, sometimes when I was talking about something, she would just sort of say, like, is something true or is it helpful in a given moment? You know, because there's a lot of things that can be true and there's a lot of things that can be helpful. And I think the thing I'm grappling with right now in this country is because so many of us live in just different realities, like different realities. And what is true is that not all of those realities are equal. Like there is a reality of our history of racism in this country, what actual oppression, what actual violence looks like versus people who feel as they are aggrieved, they feel threatened in a way that is not as supported by fact. And I think I'm wrestling a little bit with, when we think about what is helpful to, I loved what you said about forgiveness. I think figuring out, what do we do with that? How do we bring our brothers and sisters in this country who are existing in those parallel realities? What is the process by which we bring them back? Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that I reflect on a lot is that I think our first principle requires that we cannot make a caricature of anyone living or dead. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very easy to do in retrospect and hard to do in the moment. And I hope that we can all, I think especially, it sounds like there's a lot of conversations around this happening in your town. I know this is happening where I grew up and where I live now. And I hope that through telling of honest and complex stories, but also telling true stories, that we can somehow bring people back to a narrative that is true and the one that we share.
Thank you, Rachel. Important information. I remember when you start thinking about as a child your parents, when you get to that point when you realize they were human and you see both sides, you see the weakness and the strengths, and it's just a good example that when you start looking into someone, we're just as human as can be, and to offer that forgiveness and tolerance perhaps too. No easy answers for sure. We have one more thought here.
Rachel, I had 11 years in the military, and I've always felt conflicted about glorifying the military. We need to always keep in mind that the purpose of the military is to kill and destroy. So whenever dictators take over, one of the things is glorify the military. So we always need to think about the two things. People given a service to protect the country, but it's not their purpose is not a glorious one. Their result, we hope, is it will defend us as much more as we can take it.
Okay, thank you. Let me take this one. And it's written somewhere, I don't know if it's somewhere in one of the amendments or whatever, that it's every citizen's obligation to be willing to defend his country. And I know I don't think of that very often. If push comes to shove, we're sitting here with the benefits of citizenship, but there's also the responsibility. And now we're going to have our second hymn. It would be 123, Spirit of Life. Rise as you're able. I think that's one of our favorites, and often we don't sing it. So when Rachel requested it, I thought, yes, that's a good way to close out the year. For closing words, as we leave the service today and perhaps scatter in many directions, celebrating summer, fun, getting away, let us remember to cup our hands and hold this peace in the sanctuary, this peace, even when the sirens begin, even when sorrow calls out old and gnarled, even when words grow fangs and rend, cupped hands gently open, supporting peace like the golden hollow of our Tibetan ringing bowl, like a towering rim of mountains, like the Chesapeake and the Chester, defining this place we call home. Peace to each of us in the months ahead. And now please join me as I extinguish the candle. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. Peace we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And now the prelude, postlude.
This next piece is something that's very well known, but the lyrics I chose it because they're originally about young men going off to war. This is O Danny Boy.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rachel. And this service does not have to cease. Carry this worship with you wherever you go. Be a blessing in your going out and your coming home. Remember, our services next week or the informal ones, same time, same place. And for those who are traveling, have a safe and happy vacation. Blessed be.